Imagine being just 18 years old, barely out of school, barely a man. You're told your country needs you, that you'll be a hero, that the war will be over by Christmas. Excited? Maybe even proud. You sign up. You hug your family goodbye, not knowing you might never see them again. This is the reality of being a soldier in the First World War, and why it absolutely sucked. The first thing you'd see when you arrived at the front wasn't glory, or flags, or honor. It was mud. Endless mud. A twisted, hellish landscape of ditches and trenches carved into the earth. These trenches stretched for over 25,000 miles across Europe. They were your new home. You'd live in them, sleep in them, fight in them, and maybe die in them. The trenches were not shelters. They were prisons. Imagine narrow ditches, barely wide enough to stand, filled with ankle-deep water, crawling with insects. If it rained, which it often did, the floor turned into thick sludge. Soldiers sank into it with every step. The smell hit you first, a choking mix of sewage, sweat, rotting corpses, and gunpowder. It never went away. Then there was trench foot. Standing in cold, wet mud for days at a time, your feet swelled, skin peeled off, and infection set in. In 1914 alone, British forces recorded over 20,000 cases of trench foot. The only prevention was rubbing whale oil on your feet or changing socks. But supplies were short, and often you didn't even have dry socks to wear. The pain was unbearable, and if it got too bad, doctors cut off your toes or your entire foot. Food didn't make life easier. Forget warm meals. Most days you survived on hard biscuits, stale bread, or bully beef, a kind of canned meat so salty and rubbery that soldiers joked you could use it as a weapon. Cooking was almost impossible. Fires gave away your position, and anyway, smoke filled the trench with more suffocating air. Rats feasted better than the men. They grew huge, fat from eating corpses left unburied in no man's land. At night, they crept into the trenches, biting at soldiers' hands and faces as they slept. And the lice. Your uniform was never washed, crawling with thousands of lice. Soldiers scratched until they bled, and even when they burned their clothes, the lice returned. These tiny insects spread trench fever. Fevers so intense men shook and collapsed, unable to stand. If disease didn't get you, the constant shelling might. Day and night, artillery pounded the trenches. Imagine trying to sleep while the ground shakes, your ears ring, and you know the next shell might land on your head. Shrapnel tore bodies apart, ripping off limbs in seconds. In the Battle of Verdun alone, over 60 million artillery shells were fired. That's one shell for every second of the 10-month battle. And then there was the gas. Poison gas became the new nightmare of modern war. Chlorine gas burned the throat, suffocated the lungs. Mustard gas blistered skin, blinded eyes, melted the lining of the throat. Gas masks existed, but they were clumsy and slow to put on. If you didn't react fast enough, you died choking on your own fluids. Between 1915 and 1918, over 1.3 million men were poisoned by gas. Nearly 100,000 died in agony. Survivors were left scarred, blind, or with permanent breathing problems. Every so often, orders came to go over the top. That meant climbing out of the relative safety of the trench and charging into no man's land, a wasteland of mud, barbed wire, shell craters, and corpses. Ahead of you were machine guns. A single machine gun crew could fire 500 rounds a minute, enough to cut down entire waves of soldiers in seconds. At the Battle of the Somme in 1916, the British Army suffered 57,000 casualties in one day. Imagine running forward, watching your friends fall one after another, knowing your own life might end in the next heartbeat. If you survived the gunfire, you might trip over barbed wire or sink into shell craters filled with water. Wounded men often drowned in the mud, calling for help until their voices went silent. No man's land wasn't just dangerous, It was hell itself. And if you got injured, your nightmare wasn't over. Medical treatment was primitive. Antibiotics didn't exist. A gunshot wound often meant amputation. Infection killed more men than bullets. Field hospitals were overwhelmed, filled with screaming men missing arms, legs, faces. Doctors worked in bloody tents, sewing off limbs with little anesthetic. The stench of blood and gangrene was everywhere. Then there was the psychological toll. Soldiers developed what they called shell shock. Today we know it as PTSD. Men shook uncontrollably, unable to stop trembling. They screamed at night, reliving battles in their dreams. Some lost the ability to speak. Instead of being treated, many were accused of cowardice. Over 300 British soldiers were executed by their own army for desertion or cowardice, though many were simply traumatized boys who couldn't take it anymore. And imagine this lasting not for weeks, but years. 4 long years of mud, blood, and terror. Letters from home reminded you of the life you'd left behind. Families, wives, children. A life that felt more and more like a dream. You might get a letter today, and tomorrow you'd be dead. Soldiers carried these letters in their breast pockets, sometimes found stained with their blood. When the war finally ended in 1918, almost 20 million people were dead. Entire towns had lost their young men. Those who came home weren't the same. Some were blind, some armless or legless, others haunted by nightmares until their last breath. The world called them heroes, but inside, many felt broken. So why did it suck to be a soldier in World War I? Because it wasn't about honor or glory. It was about trying to survive in a trench filled with lice, rats, gas, and fear. It was about living every day with the sound of shells exploding above your head. It was about charging into no man's land knowing you might die before you took 10 steps. It was about fighting for a handful of muddy ground that meant nothing in the end. For the young men who lived it, the Great War wasn't great at all. It was misery, horror, and despair on a scale the world had never seen. And for those soldiers, trapped in mud and blood, it truly, truly sucked.